Welcome back. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into today's gripping story. Two 8-year-old twins. A dead work site, rain moving in like a wall. If a single cry had stayed buried under wind and steel, no one would have found them. But a patrol officer and his K9 partner, Ranger, heard what every other ear missed. What followed felt less like luck and more like a gift from above. A race with the clock that brought two little girls back to the arms that loved them. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and hold on to the hope that sometimes heaven still answers. Over Maple Hollow, Vermont, the air still smelled of wet bark and clean earth from the storm that ripped through town 2 nights before. Main Street's maples wore late autumn gold and red like stubborn flags, yet the gutters were stuffed with broken twigs and damp piles of leaves. The morning sky looked like tin, soft silver, thin clouds stretched out like worn cloth, making a promise of more light rain before evening. Past the neat porches and painted fences, an unfinished construction site lay quiet. Steel frames streaked with rust stood like bones. Warped planks leaned, puddles gleamed in half-dug holes, and old tools sat where hands had dropped them months ago. The wind nudged strips of torn caution tape so they snapped and fluttered. Along the ground, Leah Bennett walked quickly on the cracked sidewalk, honey blonde ponytail bouncing with each step. She was small for 8, all quick hands and quicker eyes. Today, those fingers picked at the frayed strap of her faded blue backpack. One step behind came her twin, Sophie, same height, same hair, but with a slower pace and a careful look, a small bandage on her elbow from last week's fall. Where Leah scanned everything like a bird, Sophie looked longer, as if saving each scene. They had spent the morning at Maple Hollow's little brick library. Their mom was at the bakery on Walnut Street, rolling dough and frosting cakes. The girls followed their usual back route home, a winding path that passed the construction site at the edge of town. Work there had stopped after the developer went, under when winter storms caved a section of foundation. What remained were stacks of unused materials, tall skeletons of buildings, and in the far corner, a wide pit dug for future pipes, left open and slick after the storm. The town had posted warnings, but when the last wind tore down the flimsy fence, no one had put it back up. Leah's curiosity lit up the second she saw the tangled yellow tape flapping in the breeze. "Let's just look," she said, voice carrying the brave tone she used in their backyard games. Sophie shifted her books to the other arm. "Mom said—" "I know what Mom said," Leah cut in, already slipping through a gap in the fallen fence. "We'll be quick." Inside the site, the ground felt soft and treacherous. Mud and gravel mixed under their shoes, making every step a guess. Sophie kept glancing up at the tall frames that threw long, sharp shadows over the puddles. "Leah, it's slippery!" Her warning came too late. Something crunched under Leah's foot. Then the soil sank. Both girls dropped with a startled cry as dirt and small stones slid and tumbled with them. They hit hard. Pain shot up Sophie's leg so sharp it hollowed her breath. She grabbed her shin with both hands. Leah coughed in a cloud of dust, scrambled to her knees and reached for her sister. It's okay," she whispered fast, though her voice shook. They had fallen into a hole about 15 feet deep. The walls were almost straight up, slick with clay. Above them, daylight looked far away, a small square framed by jagged edges of dark earth. When Sophie tried to move, she cried out. Her right leg lay bent wrong at the ankle, swelling already pressing against the fabric of her jeans. Leah tipped, back her head and shouted, "Help!" The sound didn't go far. The heavy air seemed to swallow it. They called again, thin voices breaking, the damp walls throwing the echo back at them. It smelled like wet dirt and metal in the pit. Somewhere nearby, water plinked into a puddle, steady as a clock. Across town, Officer Mason Clark guided his black and white SUV along Maple Hollow Road. 37, broad-shouldered posture. Straight from years of training, he wore the look of someone who had seen long nights and too many hard calls. Short dark hair showed early gray at the temples, lines at his eyes carved more by worry than age. 8 years in patrol after 5 in the Marines had taught him discipline and quiet. It had also left him with a weight he carried alone. 2 weeks earlier, a backcountry rescue had ended too late. The image of a face he could not save still woke him in the thin hours. Behind the mesh divider sat Ranger, 4 years old, sable and black German shepherd, all muscle and mind. Search and rescue. Trained, steady in crowds, fast in fields, Ranger was the partner Mason trusted without question. His coat gleamed even in gray light. His ears shifted like small radar dishes, catching and sorting every noise. Mason made his routine pass toward the south end of town when Ranger's head snapped to the half-open window. Ears up, nose lifted, a low whine rumbled out of his chest. "What is it, boy?" Mason asked, already slowing. Ranger's gaze locked past the road toward the cluster of half-built frames by the trees. A gust moved through the SUV, carrying a faint sound with it. So faint, Mason almost thought it was only the creak of old beams. But Ranger barked once, short and urgent, then paced in the back, tail like a pointer. Mason's pulse lifted in the way it does when training and instinct meet. He turned in by the torn fence and rolled to a stop. The engine clicked in the chill. "All right," he murmured. "Let's check." The door swung open and Ranger hopped down, nose to the ground. Mason followed, boots sinking a little in. The wet soil. Wind tugged at his jacket, bringing the sour smell of rust and the damp scent of timber. Ranger wove between lumber stacks and an overturned wheelbarrow and barked again, sharper this time, pulling Mason toward the far corner. Mason scanned the ground like a map. Loose earth, exposed rebar, a slant of old scaffolding swaying. Then he saw it. The break in the dirt, the fresh crumbs of soil sliding off the edge. Ranger stood at the rim of a large pit, peering down. Mason stepped up and looked in. 2 small faces stared back, one pale with pain, one streaked with mud and tears. "Officer," Laya's voice wavered, relief and fear tangled together. Mason dropped to a knee. "I see you," he said, voice steady. "We're going to get you out. Is either of you hurt?" "My leg," Sophie said, swallowing. "I think it's broken." Mason's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed level. "Okay, don't move it. My name's Mason, and this is Ranger. He'll stay with you while I call help." He radioed for rescue and EMS, words clipped and clear. Ranger settled at the edge like a guard, head tilted, eyes fixed on the girls below as if counting their breaths with them. The wind shifted and carried a thin cry from somewhere far off, a sound swallowed again by the gray day. Mason's head turned at once, ears and training both catching it. He took note, then focused back on the pit. "Not today," he told the memory that tried to surface. "Not here. Not with these kids." Ranger's bark bounced off the clay walls and came, back sharp. Mason planted one knee in the mud, braced his other foot against a slab of broken concrete, and kept his voice low but strong. "Stay still. Help is almost here." He pulled a small coil of nylon from his belt, enough to secure, not to haul, and kept it ready in case the ground shifted. Ranger moved the rim step by step, nose close, mapping the unsafe edges. Mason flipped on his flashlight and cut a white path through the mist drifting in from the fields. He swept the beam over the girls again. Sophie's ankle looked bad. Wrong angle, quick swelling. Her face was drained of color, but she held herself quiet. Laya had her arm around her sister, breaths quick and small. Mason measured distances in his head. The soil looked weak underfoot. A wrong step from him could make the edge crumble. He needed the rescue team's rigging before he risked going down. Across town, in a cafe by the post office, Emma Carter sat at a little corner table with a half-written article glowing on her laptop screen. 32, medium height, dark, auburn hair twisted into a loose bun. She leaned forward the way she always did, like a runner at the line. Her eyes worked the room even when she wasn't trying, always reading what was said and what was not. Emma had chased stories in Boston, newsrooms, before coming back to Maple Hollow 2 years earlier after losing her younger brother in a construction accident. Since then, she had worked as a freelance investigative reporter, the ache of his loss shaping the kind of stories she chose and the way she told them, driven by a quiet but relentless desire to expose negligence and corner-cutting in public safety. The name Hank Doyle had crossed her desk a month earlier, an equipment operator on the Maple Hollow site who had vanished shortly after a partial collapse halted the project. Witnesses had last seen him leaving the site in the early hours of a stormy night. No police report had been filed, but rumors whispered of disputes with management and warnings ignored. Emma had been digging for weeks, but the trail had grown cold. Her phone, lying beside a half-finished cup of coffee, crackled with the feed from her portable police scanner. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but clipped. Unit 12. Report of 2 miners trapped in a ground collapse south end of Ridgeway construction site. Medical and rescue en route. Emma froze mid-keystroke. The Ridgeway site. Her eyes narrowed. That was Hank Doyle's last known workplace. She slid her laptop shut, scooped up her camera and notepad, and left the cafe with purposeful strides. Back at the pit, Mason's radio hissed to life. Unit 12, Engine 2, and Rescue 4, ETA 8 minutes. Advise on patient condition. Mason pressed the mic. 2 minors, 1 probable lower leg fracture, conscious and responsive, ground unstable, no attempt. To extract until units arrive. He clipped the radio back and crouched lower. La Sophie, he said, using their names to anchor them. I'm going to give you something to hold on to just in case. Ranger will stay here. He tied one end of the rope to a steel rebar jutting from the dirt, lowering the other end into the pit. Don't climb, just keep it near you. If the ground shifts, you wrap it around your wrist. Ranger lay down again, his head just over the lip of the pit, ears twitching to every sound. Be it the rustle of leaves beyond the fence or the faint drip of water inside the hole. Mason glanced at him, recognizing the dog's alert posture. The rumble of a car approached from the direction of town. Emma's battered blue Subaru pulled up just beyond the fallen fence. She got out quickly, her boots splashing into a shallow puddle. She spotted Mason instantly, the bright police across his back, unmistakable. Mason. Her voice was loud enough to carry, but careful not to startle the children below. Mason looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Emma, what are you doing here? She lifted her camera, slung over her shoulder. Working. Heard the call. This is the Ridgeway site, right? He gave a curt nod, but gestured for her to stay back from the pit. 2 kids, 1 injured, grounds unstable, stay on the firm section. Emma's eyes scanned the site, noting the collapsed fencing, the slick mud, and the pit itself. Her gaze sharpened as it caught on a small access shack partially hidden by a toppled stack of plywood. The door hung open, and inside she could see a scattering of tools, an overturned chair, and something else, a faded safety vest, its reflective stripes dulled by dust. While Mason stayed with the girls, Emma drifted toward the shack. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and rust. On a shelf beneath the window sat a dusty canvas bag, its zipper half open. She tugged it onto the workbench and unzipped it fully. Inside lay a rolled-up set of site plans, a dented thermos, and a small spiral notebook with H. Doyle scrolled in block letters across the cover. She flipped through quickly, pages of handwritten notes, some with dates and times, others with warnings and red ink. Soil too soft near South Trench. Rain pooling. Risk of collapse. Supervisor ignoring hazard report. She closed the notebook, a knot forming in her stomach. This wasn't just evidence. It was a record of a warning that no one had acted on. Outside, Mason heard the faint wail of sirens drawing closer. Hal leaned over the pit again. "Rescue's almost here. You're doing great." Sophie managed a weak smile. Laya nodded, still clutching her sister's hand. Ranger stood now, tail flicking once, ears tracking the sound of the incoming vehicles. Emma returned, notebook tucked into her jacket. She caught Mason's eye, her expression serious. "We need to talk about what I just found," she said quietly so the girls wouldn't hear. Mason gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that promised they would, but not until the kids were safe. The first fire engine rolled onto the site, tires churning the wet gravel. 2 paramedics jumped down from the trailing ambulance, pulling gear from the side compartments. Mason stepped back to brief them quickly, pointing out the most stable path to the edge of the pit. Ranger sat beside him, gaze still locked on the girls, as if his watch wouldn't end until they were back on solid ground. The sirens had faded into a low mechanical hum as the rescue team fanned out across the unstable ground, setting up gear with the swift precision of practiced hands. The air in Maple Hollow felt heavier now, the kind of thick autumn damp that clung to the skin and made every breath taste faintly of wet leaves and metal. Mason moved through the scene with the focus of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but knew it would never be exactly the same. His gloves were already on, his harness snug around his waist, the safety line clipped to the anchor point the firefighters had driven into the most solid patch of earth. The team leader, Captain Ryan Maddox, a man in his early 40s with sandy hair, stree by gray and a weathered jawline, approached Mason with a quick nod. Ryan was a veteran of countless rescues, his calm demeanor masking a relentless drive for control in chaotic situations. "You're going down?" he asked. Mason's voice was low but steady. "I've been with them since I got here. They know me now. It'll be faster." Ryan didn't argue. He simply checked Mason's carabiner and gave the signal. Ranger stood just behind Ryan, paws planted, tail stiff, his amber eyes locked on the pit as though measuring the risk himself. His ears flicked at every scrape of a boot, every vibration through the ground. Mason eased over the lip of the pit, boots finding purchase on the slick clay walls. The rope above creaked with each measured descent. He kept his flashlight aimed downward, not to blind the girls, but to light each foothold. Laya's face appeared first in the beam, her eyes wide, but fixed on him. "It's okay," he said, lowering himself the final few feet until his boots sank into the damp floor of the hole. Sophie sat propped against the wall, her face pale, jaw clenched. Mason knelt beside her, quickly scanning the injury. Her lower leg twisted slightly, swelling already visible. "We're going to stabilize this before we move you," he explained, pulling a compact splint from the pouch on his belt. He spoke steadily, his tone measured, the way one might talk someone through a storm. Leia watched every movement, her breathing uneven. Mason looked at her. "You're helping me." "All right, keep your hands on her shoulders. Talk to her. Tell her about something you like. Your favorite place, favorite day. Keep her thinking about that." While Mason worked, the ground shivered faintly under their feet. Above them, Ranger barked twice, short, clipped. A sound Mason had learned meant a warning. He glanced upward but kept moving, securing the splint, wrapping the bandage snug without cutting off circulation. Up on the surface, Emma lingered near, the site's storage area, her boots crunching over scattered nails and splintered wood. Ranger had appeared at her side moments earlier, nudging her leg before trotting a few paces toward the small collapsed structure nearby. Curious, she followed, brushing aside a curtain of ivy that had crept over its doorway. The inside smelled of damp earth and oil. Among the debris, She spotted an old backpack, its canvas faded and straps frayed. She crouched and pulled it toward the light. The zipper was stubborn, but after a few tugs, it gave way. Inside, she found a plastic ID card with the photo of a man in his late 30s. Square jaw, short brown hair, blue eyes that seemed both tired and alert at once. The name read Hank Doyle. Beneath the ID was a battered notebook, the front cover marked, in thick black pen, South Trench, not safe. Flipping through, she found pages of quick, cramped handwriting. Weather notes, soil conditions, mentions of supervisors dismissing warnings. One page was underlined twice. If rain comes, ground will give. Emma stood there for a moment, the wind lifting strands of hair across her cheek. She'd never met Hank Doyle, but she felt the shape of his absence now, a man who had seen danger coming and been ignored. She slipped the notebook into her jacket and made her way back toward the rescue scene, her eyes drawn again to Ranger. The dog had returned to the pit's edge, lying down with his head over the side, watching Mason's progress with unwavering focus. Below, Mason finished securing Sophie's leg. "You did great," he told her, then glanced up and gave the hand signal for the haul team to prepare. "We're going to get you out Juanita time, Sophie, first." Laya's lip trembled, but she nodded. "I'll be right behind you," Mason promised. A rescue harness descended slowly from above, swaying slightly in the damp breeze. Mason guided Sophie into it, fastening each buckle with care. She winced but didn't cry. "Look at Ranger," Mason told her. "He's waiting for you." Sophie's eyes lifted toward the rim where Rare's head was silhouetted against the pale sky. She managed the smallest of smiles. "Haul," Mason called, and the rope went teet. Sophie rose steadily, the walls of the pit sliding past her like a slow frame of film. When she reached the top, hands reached out to lift her onto the waiting stretcher. Ranger sniffed her hand once, before stepping back to let the medics work. Mason turned to Laya. "Your turn." He kept his voice light, asking her about the library books they had borrowed that morning, distracting her as he guided her into the harness. As she ascended, Mason stayed below, watching the walls for any signs of collapse. By the time he was hauled out last, the pit felt colder, the shadows longer. He unclipped his harness, the ground solid under his boots again. Sophie was already being treated by the paramedics, her leg immobilized, a blanket around her shoulders. Laya sat beside her, clutching her sister's hand. Emma approached Mason quietly, her expression unreadable. "I found something," she murmured, just low enough for him to hear. She tapped her jacket pocket where the notebook now rested. Mason glanced at her, his face giving away nothing, but he nodded once, a silent promise that they'd talk when the girls were safe. Ranger stood between them in the pit, his coat dark against the pale churned mud, ears forward, watching everything as if the job wasn't over yet. The pale afternoon light filtered weakly through the low clouds above Maple Hollow, turning the damp construction site into a muted wash of gray and ochre. A thin mist clung to the air, wrapping every sound in a muffled haze. From the bottom of the pit, Mason could see only a jagged slice of sky, where silhouettes occasionally crossed. Rescue crew members moving between gear piles and the edge. The air down here was cooler, heavy with the earthy scent of clay and rain-soaked soil. He had draped his patrol jacket over Sophie's shoulders, tucking it snugly so the warmth would stay close to her thin frame. The oversized garments wallowed her, but the slight rise in her collar told him it was working. Laya sat pressed against Sophie's side. Her own knees pulled tight to her chest, but her gaze kept darting toward Mason as if checking that he was still there. "Pain still the same?" he asked Sophie, kneeling so they were eye level. She gave a small nod. "It's not worse," she murmured, her voice faint but steady. Mason took that as a win. He glanced at this watch, mentally counting the minutes until the next rescue update. Above the distant hum of machinery, he could hear Riarz's paws shifting on the rim, the dog pacing in small arcs, always keeping the pit within sight. Mason clicked his radio. Unit 12 to command. Patient stable, leg immobilized, both minors responsive. Over. Static. Then the calm reply of the incident commander. Copy. Unit 12. Rigging complete in 2 minutes. The voice was Captain Maddox again, steady as bedrock. Mason found a small comfort in that. Though his mind was already turning over the risk factors, soil saturation, wall stability, possible aftershocks from the heavy machinery, he'd been in enough unstable structures to know that patience could be as dangerous as haste. On the surface, Emma Carter approached the pit's edge with cautious steps, cradling the faded backpack she'd recovered earlier. The straps were damp, the canvas cold against her hands. She caught sight of Mason below and called down just loud enough to carry. I found this Hank Doyle's. There's more in it. Her expression was a mix of grim satisfaction and something darker. The look of someone who has stumbled onto proof they weren't sure they wanted to find. Mason raised a hand to signal her to stay where the ground was firm. Set it down away from the edge, he instructed. Emma nodded, placing it on a stack of unused boards, then crouching to unzip it again. She pulled out the notebook, flipping to the underlined pages she'd seen earlier, and read aloud a few lines. Warnings about unstable soil, ignored work stoppage requests, and the exact weather conditions that had made the site unsafe. For a moment, Mason wasn't in the pit anymore. He was back in the municipal meeting hall 6 months ago, watching a younger Hank Doyle stand before the planning committee. Hank had been a quiet man with a square frame, cropped hair, and the steady presence of someone used to hard labor. Mason remembered the way Hank's voice carried a hint of caution even when he wasn't talking about danger. That day he tried to explain the soil risks, but the developers brushed it off, citing budget constraints. Mason, then just assigned to routine patrols, hadn't been in a position to intervene. Now the memory returned with a sharper edge. If Hank's warnings had been taken seriously, this pit might have been filled and secured months ago. The thought pressed down on Mason with a weight heavier than the clay walls around him. Above, Emma stepped back, pulling her phone from her coat. She began snapping photos of the notebook, each page carefully documented. She had the look of someone whose mind was already building the story skeleton. Dates, quotes, proof. The wind tugged at her auburn hair, loosening strands from her bun, but she ignored it, focused entirely on the evidence. Command to Unit 12, rescue descent in 30 seconds, came Maddox's voice over the radio. Mason answered. Copy, ready for patient transfer. He looked back at Sophie and Laya. All right, you're about to hear some noise, but it means help is coming. Stay still until I tell you. Laya nodded quickly. Sophie just tightened her grip on the edge of his jacket. On the surface, one of the rescue techs, Sarah Keller, moved into position. Sarah was in her mid-30s, tall and lean with a runner's build, her dark hair cut short under a bright yellow helmet. She was known among the crew for her calm focus and ability to work in tight, hazardous spaces. A climbing accident in her 20s had ended her mountaineering career, but had given her a deep respect for safety protocols, something she enforced without compromise. Sarah double-checked her harness, clipped into the rigging, and exchanged a silent nod with Captain Maddox. Then she eased over the edge, the belay line hissing softly through the descender as she began her controlled descent toward Mason. Ranger stood a few feet back, watching every motion, his head tilting slightly as if tracking each measured step. When Sarah reached the pit floor, she gave Mason a quick once-over, then knelt beside Sophie. "Hey there," she said gently, her voice carrying that steady reassurance of someone who's done this before. "We're going to get you up top in no time." She and Mason worked together to transfer Sophie into the rescue harness. Mason keeping her legs supported while Sarah secured T-straps. As they worked, Emma stepped away from the crowd of responders, her phone buzzing in her pocket. It was a message from an old contact in the county records office. "Call me when you can. Something about Ridgway's permit files you'll want to hear." She glanced back toward Mason and the girls. The urgency in her chest now doubled, not just to get them out, but to piece together why they had been in danger at all. Hall. Maddox's voice carried from above, and the line went taut. Sophie began to rise, her small frame cradled by the harness. Laya watched her go, biting her lip, until they were out of sight. Mason placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're next." When Sophie cleared the edge, Ranger moved closer, sniffing her once, before falling back in step with the medics. The dog's gaze lingered only a second before shifting back to the pit, waiting for the next ascent. The sound of metal clinking against metal broke the tense quiet as the rescue team locked the final pulleys into place. Damp earth shifted under the boots of the firefighters as they secured the main ladder and prepared the stretcher rig. The air had cooled further. A fine mist was now falling, dusting the jackets of everyone on site and clinging to the fur along Rares's back. The German Shepherd stood at the edge of the pit, his chest rising and falling steadily, eyes fixed on Mason and Leia below. Captain Maddox gave a sharp hand signal and 2 crew members stepped forward with the stretcher. Bright orange webbing stretched over an aluminum frame. One of them, Luis Ortega, was a stocky man in his late 20s, with close-cropped black hair and an easy smile that rarely surfaced in moments like this. Known among the team for his steady hands and delicate extractions, Luis moved with quiet efficiency as he checked the straps twice over. Mason knelt beside Laya, speaking in a low voice. "You'll be going up right after your sister. Stay calm and keep your hands on the sides." "All right." Laya nodded, her lips pressed together, eyes darting between Mason and the ladder now descending into the pit. Above, Sarah Keller guided Sophie toward the stretcher, her voice firm but warm. Mason helped lift Sophie into position, his gloved hands careful not to jar her spinted leg. She winced but didn't cry out, her eyes seeking out Ranger at the rim. The dog responded by leaning forward and giving a low, reassuring chuff, as if promising to be there when she reached the top. Up slow. Maddox's voice cut through the mist. The rope went taut and Sophie began to ascend, the stretcher swaying gently as the crew above worked in smooth rhythm. Mason kept his eyes on her until she disappeared from sight, then shifted his focus back to Leia. "Your turn," he said, offering his hand. She gripped it tightly, letting him guide her to the harness. As Leia was lifted toward the pale sky, Mason remained crouched in the pit, scanning the clay walls for any new cracks. The ground had shifted twice in the last 10 minutes. He wanted to be sure no fresh hazard lingered before he left. Satisfied, he gave the signal to haul him out. The climb felt longer than it was. The mist dampening every surface, and the smell of churned earth heavy in the air. At the surface, Sophie was already on a gurney, a medic adjusting her blanket. Ranger patted over and pressed his nose gently to her hand, earning the smallest smile from the girl. The ambulance waited a few feet away, its back doors open and the interior lights casting a warm yellow glow. Laya hovered nearby, refusing to climb in until Mason gave her a reassuring nod. Before the medics rolled Sophie away, Emma stepped to the side, her phone buzzing in her pocket. She glanced at the collar, ID, Sheriff Douglas Hale. In his mid-50s, with a barrel chest and thinning sandy hair, Hale was a lifelong resident of Maple Hollow, known for his straight talk and deep loyalty to the community. His voice came low and direct through the line. "Emma, about Hank Doyle, you can stop looking for him here. We've got confirmation he left town right after that collapse. Word is, it was after some kind of accident on site. Emma moved away from the hum of the rescue scene, pressing a hand over her other ear to hear better. An accident? What kind? Hale exhaled audibly. Not much detail, just that it wasn't fatal, but he didn't file any formal reports. Folks are saying he just walked away. Emma frowned, glancing back at the pit where the last of the gear was being hauled up. That doesn't fit with what I've found, Sheriff. Hank was documenting hazards. Why leave without saying anything if he thought people were at risk? There was a pause on the line. Then Hale replied, "Sometimes people see trouble coming and decide not to stand in its way." His tone suggested he'd said all he was going to say. When she hung up, Emma caught Mason's eye across the sight. He was speaking to Maddox, his stance straight, but his expression tight. She didn't interrupt. Instead, she took out her small notebook and wrote down every word she could remember from the call. Something about the sheriff's clip tone told her there was more to the story, something unsaid. The had thickened by the time the ambulance pulled away, carrying Sophie toward Maple Hollow General Hospital. Laya rode in the back seat beside, her sister. Mason's jacket still wrapped around her small frame. Ranger watched the vehicle until it disappeared beyond the curve of the road, then turned to Mason, tail giving a single deliberate wag. Emma slipped the strap of her camera over her shoulder and walked toward him. "Sheriff says Hank left town after an accident here. No details. He made it sound like it wasn't worth chasing, but she let the sentence hang." Mason's gaze lingered on, the churned mud at their feet. "Or like someone doesn't want us to chase it," he said quietly. The rescue crew began packing their equipment, voices low, boots squatching in the soft earth. Maddox approached Mason, offering a firm handshake. "Good. Work down there. Those girls are alive because you stayed steady." Mason nodded once, but his mind was already elsewhere, on a quiet man named Hank Doyle on a collapsed work site, and on the unanswered questions now piling higher than the mud around them. Ranger gave a soft whine as if sensing the shift in Mason's mood. Mason reached down to scratch the dog's neck, the warm fur grounding him back to the present. "Come on, partner," he murmured. "We've still got work to do." The warm, antiseptic-scented air of Maple Hollow General Hospital stood in stark contrast to the damp chill Mason had left behind at the construction site. Fluorescent lights hummed quietly above, casting a pale glow over the rows of curtained bays in the emergency department. The muted beeps of monitors and the faint hiss of oxygen tanks made a background rhythm that Mason had grown familiar with. Over years of seeing both victims and survivors come through these doors, Sophie lay on a hospital bed near the far wall, her leg elevated, encased in a clean white cast from ankle to mid-thigh. Her face was still pale, but there was a steadiness in her breathing now. Laya sat beside her, perched on the edge of the mattress, her own knees scuffed and wrapped in small adhesive bandages. Both girls wore soft cotton hospital gowns, their hair slightly damp from when a nurse had helped wash away the dirt. The curtain rustled and Rachel Bennett stepped in. She was in her mid-30s, of medium height, with straight chestnut brown hair that fell just past her shoulders. She had the build of someone accustomed to long hours on her feet. Her work at the local bakery had given her both toned arms and a habit of moving quickly. But now her steps slowed as she took in the sight of her daughters. Her gray-green eyes shimmered with tears, her voice breaking on the girls' names. Laya, Sophie. The girls turned to her instantly, and in moments Rachel had crossed the room, crouching to wrap them both in her arms. She pressed her cheek against Sophie's hair, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and shampoo, as though anchoring herself in the fact that they were safe. I thought. She cut herself off, shaking her head, and looked up at Mason, who stood just inside the doorway with Ranger at his side. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm despite the emotion threading through it. "Both of you." Mason nodded once, his hand resting lightly on RER's harness. The dog's ears flicked forward, then relaxed, his dark eyes calm, but attentive. Mason's relief was quiet, buried beneath the lingering echo of the pit. The sound of shifting dirt, the way Sophie's voice had faltered when she spoke. He had walked away from this one with everyone alive, but the thin line between rescue and loss was something he felt acutely. Rachel straightened and brushed a hand across her face. Then Ursus said, "You stayed down there with them the whole time." Her tone carried a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Mason shrugged slightly. "They needed someone until the team could get in. Ranger made sure I didn't miss a thing from above." At the mention of his name, RER's tail gave a slow wag. From the hallway, Emma appeared, her auburn hair freed from its bun and slightly frizzed from the damp weather. She carried her worn leather satchels slung across her shoulder and a paper cup of coffee in her hand. "How are they?" she asked quietly. Rachel gave a small smile, still holding one of Sophie's hands. "Better now?" Emma stepped closer, her gaze softening at the sight of the girls. But her mind was already turning with the conversation she'd had just an hour earlier. She had stopped at the sheriff's office before coming here, and Sheriff Hale had confirmed it. Hank Doyle was alive somewhere out of state. He had left Maple Hollow days after the partial collapse at Ridgeway, and according to Hale, he had no interest in stirring the pot. It was the polite version of saying he didn't want to be dragged into blame, but Emma knew better. She had read the notebook cover-to-cover while waiting in the hospital's lobby. Hank had documented every warning he'd given about the soil composition, about the pooling water, about the risks after the last storm. The red underlined entries painted a picture of someone trying to prevent exactly what had happened to Sophie and Laya. The fact that no one had acted and that Hank's notes had been left behind made her jaw tighten. She caught Mason's eye over Rachel's shoulder. "Can we talk later?" she murmured. He gave the faintest nod, reading the determination in her face. Emma had decided she was going to write a piece that couldn't be ignored, one that laid bare how negligence and safety protocols could put lives in danger, especially in small towns where projects too often slipped through with minimal oversight. A nurse, pale-skinned and slim with a neat bob of blonde hair, entered with a clipboard. The X-ray confirmed no additional fractures, she said to Rachel. "She'll need to keep weight off that leg for 6 to 8 weeks. Rachel thanked her, visibly relieved. The nurse gave Ranger a quick, curious glance before leaving. Dogs weren't common visitors in this wing, but Mason's badge and the dog's calm demeanor earned him a quiet pass. The girls began to grow sleepy, under the steady warmth of the hospital blankets. Rachel smoothed the edge over Sophie's cast, her thumb brushing lightly across the fabric. Mason lingered for a few more minutes, then crouched to speak softly to Laya. "You were brave today. Not many kids could keep calm like you did." Laya's small smile was shy but genuine. When he straightened, Ranger leaned into his leg, a silent reminder that the day's work wasn't over. Not for him and not for Emma either. Outside, the rain had eased into a light drizzle, but the clouds hung heavy as though the town itself was holding its breath. Maple Hollow's Central Park was dressed in the colors of the season. Deep reds, burnt oranges, and amber golds fluttered from the maple trees that arched over the main thoroughfare. Wooden stalls lined the path, their roofs draped with garlands of dried corn husks and pumpkin vines. The crisp air carried the mingled scents of cinnamon, kettle corn, and spiced cider, weaving through the sound of laughter and the hum of live banjo music from a gazebo wrapped in golden leaves. The annual autumn festival had always been a source of pride for the town. But this year, the gathering carried an extra note of celebration. Near the center of the park, a small stage had been erected. The polished wood was edged with bales of hay, and a banner hung above reading, "Honoring our local heroes." Behind the curtain, Mason stood in his neatly pressed dark blue uniform, the gold badge on his chest, catching the low afternoon light. Ranger sat at his side, his sable and black coat freshly brushed, ears forward as if sensing the crowd's anticipation. From the wings, Mason caught sight of Sophie Bennett making her way toward the stage steps, leaning lightly on a pair of silver crutches. She was dressed in a cranberry red sweater and dark leggings tucked into soft boots, her white cast peeking from beneath the cuff. Her twin sister, Laya, trotted alongside, holding Rose's leash with careful pride. The dog seemed to understand her gentle pace, matching her steps exactly. Rachel Bennett followed close behind. She wore a warm charcoal coat over a cream scarf, her hair loose and catching the breeze. There was a glow to her face now, a mix of relief, gratitude, and the steadying calm that had been missing in those first frantic hours after the accident. Emma stood near the front row, camera slung across her chest, her auburn hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She was dressed casually in dark jeans and a navy sweater, but her notebook was never far from her grasp. A few feet away, Mayor Helen Carelli, a tall woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked black hair and a confident, open smile, stepped up to the microphone. Known for her hands-on approach and deep involvement in local initiatives, Helen wore a tailored burgundy blazer and a maple leaf brooch pinned just above her heart. "Good people of Maple Hollow," she began, her voice carrying easily over the speakers. "Every autumn we come together to honor the season, our community, and the values that keep us strong. This year we also honor bravery, teamwork, and the spirit of care that turned what could have been tragedy into a story of hope." She gestured toward Mason and Ranger, who stepped into view with Sophie, Leia, and Rachel. Applause swelled, mixed with a few cheers from the crowd. Helen reached into a small velvet line box and withdrew a circular bronze medal engraved with the town seal. Attached to a deep green ribbon, it caught the light as she bent to place it gently around Rares's neck. "To our four-legged hero," she said warmly, "for alertness, loyalty, and service beyond duty. The hero of Maple Hollow Award." Rare's ears perked at the sound of applause, but he remained composed, glancing briefly at Mason as if to confirm the moment was complete. After the ceremony, people clustered around to congratulate them. Laya led Ranger toward the pumpkin patch stalls, while Sophie, still steadying herself on her crutches, stopped to accept a small bouquet of mums from an elderly woman with kind eyes. Emma sidled up beside Mason near the cider booth. "I've been thinking about the safety initiative we talked about," she said, handing him a folded page she'd pulled from her notebook. It was a preliminary outline for a community project: training workshops, safety audits for local work sites, and public reporting channels. If we start small, build awareness, maybe we can prevent the next Ridgeway before it happens. Mason scanned the page, Heiss expression thoughtful. "And you take point on outreach." She smiled faintly. "With your face for credibility and my pen for pressure, I think we'd make a decent team." Mason gave a short nod. "Let's do it." A few steps away, Rachel had struck up a conversation with Tom Weller, a former park ranger in his late 40s with a wiry build and a weathered ball cap. Tom ran the town's small survival skills club for kids, teaching everything from navigation to first aid. His sun face lit with interest as Rachel explained her desire to have Sophie and Leia join. "They've already learned what it means to keep calm in a crisis," she said. "I want them to know how to help themselves and others next time." Tom agreed immediately, promising to coordinate with Mason and even include Ranger in some of the demonstrations. As dusk fell, lanterns strung between the trees flickered to life, their warm glow pooling over the festival paths. Vestige cleared, and the crowd drifted toward the open field at the park's edge, where the annual fireworks display was about to begin. Families spread blankets across the cool grass, children darting between them with sparklers in hand. Mason stood slightly apart, hands in his pockets, watching as Sophie leaned down to wrap her arms around Rares's neck, her crutches set aside for the moment. Laya slipped her small hand into Rachel's, the pair silhouetted against the glow of the lanterns. Emma lingered near them, camera in hand, but for once, not snapping a picture, just taking in the scene. The first firework burst overhead, scattering gold and red across the night sky. Sophie tilted her head up, eyes wide, while Reyes' ears twitched at the sound, though he stayed calm under her touch. Laya laughed as another bloom of light shimmered above, and Rachel's hand gave hers a gentle squeeze. Mason let a slow smile ease across his face. In that instant, with the sharp autumn air in his lungs and the warm thrum of community all around, the chaos of the past days felt a little further away. This was more than a festival. It was a reminder that even after the ground falls out from under you, there's a way back to solid footing together. Sometimes miracles do not come with blinding light or a voice from the clouds. They arrive quietly in the form of a neighbor who stops to help, a child who refuses to give up hope, or a loyal dog who hears what no one else can. Perhaps God's work is often woven into the ordinary moments of our lives, the gentle guidance that leads people together at the exact right time, the strength to act when it matters most, the compassion to carry someone else's burden. In our everyday routines, we may overlook these quiet blessings. Yet, every choice to notice, to care, to step in for someone in need can be part of a greater plan. If this story touched your heart, share it so others may feel the same reminder. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to hear more stories of hope. And may God bless and protect you and your loved ones in all your